Hello, this is Eduardo Sauceda, Eddie, and I will be speaking about or presenting on experiential learning theories. Experiential learning theory has been widely accepted as a useful framework for learning-centered educational innovation, including instructional design, curriculum development, and lifelong learning. So, what shapes and influences someone's learning styles? And this is gathered mainly from Kolb's uh, learning styles inventory system that he goes through. So, first of all, of course, personality types influence the learning style for sure. But also, he explains that educational specializations, like if you are working in the arts or in the sciences or in management or sociology, etc., all these things influence the way we learn. Is your career also, your professional career is also important in the learning style or your particular learning style? Are you in communications? Are you in technology? Are you in finance or research, etc.? Also, current job role. Are you a counselor or counseling, case management, or engineering, or an executive, or support staff? All of these things are what makes or defines the learning style, and this could change in a lifetime. Also, adaptive competencies like relationships or current goals. And things of that nature. So it's very important to understand that our learning style is influenced by many things in many ways. And so it could be we could have a learning style today and that could change, in a year or two or months. So very interesting to see. And we'll see a little bit more through Kolb's model, which is the one I selected. So let's talk a little bit about history with regards to Kolb or David Kolb. He was influenced greatly by John Dewey, pragmatic or progressive learning theory, by Kurt Lewin. And actually, Kurt Lewin was teaching at MIT before he actually went to be a student of that same course. So there was some connection there, and actually, Lewin had taught a class before that it was actually being done again when he was there as a student, and he took some of that information and placed it or put it into his learning theory. Jean Piaget was another one that was influential to him, and William James and Carl Jung and Lev Vygotsky. He talks about him as well in one of his video interviews. B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning theory, and so many others that help shape what is known now as the learning styles. Actually, according to a video that he's interviewed, I shared it in my reference page. It's an interview with Thijman Sprakel. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. According to David Kolb, he was the one that coined it, the term learning styles back in the early 1970s. And I like this quote from him that says, "The center of learning is your own subjective experience," which I think is very interesting, very deep, and in such a short statement. And it's always good to sit and ponder on these great, words that someone with so much interest in learning and teaching can give us. So one of the influencers was John Dewey. So generally speaking, we can see great similarities between these two theories. John Dewey's progressive learning theory, in which education emphasizes the need to learn by doing. So some of Dewey's popular thoughts about experiential learning are that the teacher actually becomes a learner along with the student by being an observer and a facilitator. So as we can see here in his cycle, which is also a cycle like Kolb's model, the first thing is the experience, the activity. You perform, you do it, and then you share. What are your reactions, your observations? You share publicly. Then the third part is the process. You analyze the experience that you just had in the first place. And then you generalize, or you connect that experience to real world examples and then apply it finally, whatever you learn, to a similar or different situation, or practice that you've done before. And then you go back to the experience, and maybe do it again and experience it and see what your reactions or observations, applications, and so on and so forth. And you can do that in many subjects with many, many things. So this is John Dewey's model, which again is very similar in a general way to David Kolb's model as well. So let's look a little bit now back at Kolb and his work. I want to focus on the experiential learning theory that he had to share with us, or that he came up with. And the reason I want to do it is because Kolb is very contemporary. He is still alive and still sharing and still producing and still writing and still researching and giving us all this valuable information that we can play with and learn from. So according to, again, I said a video that I referenced in my presentation, he was the one that coined the term learning style. So I thought that was very interesting. Back in the 70s, he published the theory in the book. The book's name was Experiential Learning, Experience as a Source of Learning and Development. Published it back in 1984 for the first time, and then there was a revised edition in 2015. Then in 2017, he co-authored another book with his wife, Alice Dewey, called The Experiential Educator, which I think is a very interesting title, and I read a little bit, an excerpt from it. And finally, the most recent work that he has created was co-authored with Kay Peterson, and it was published also in 2017. The name of the book is How You Learn is How You Live, which again, another great title. And he founded the Institute for Experiential Learning and has participated, as we would imagine, in many journal publications around the world. That would be the Institute for Experiential Learning is what he founded there. So I'm going to go and speak about the 8 things to know about experiential learning cycle. Experience-based learning systems. This is the system that he uses in the Institute. This is an adaptable framework for creating educational programs that actively engage learners. And this provides an alternative to the traditional model of information transmission, which is lectures. So let's review these 8 important rules. Number 1, tells us that learning is an endless and recurring cycle, and it's not a linear process. It is an endless process of exchange between the learner's internal world and their external environment. It's a lifelong process of taking in and putting out, taking in experiences, reflecting on them, thinking before acting, and then experience it again and see how we're doing. And this is very well put. And somebody, for example, that is learning how to drive a vehicle, some people like to watch others do it, experience it before they actually do it. Some people like to reflect and read on it first. So you see how we may start at different parts of the cycle, but at the end of the day, to be able to have a good balance, we need to go through the whole cycle and work through it. So it's a lifelong process of taking in and putting out. The educator's job is to impress learners with the knowledge to live and work, and then we coach them to express what they have learned in highly skilled ways. Number 2 is experiencing is necessary for learning. We receive info through concrete experience and abstract conceptualization and transform it through reflective observation and active experimentation. So we go from top to bottom and from right to left in this sense. We are receivers and we are creators of information. We learn when we have a concrete experience that violates the expectations of previous beliefs or behaviors. This activates reflection. Our brain is involved in the whole process of experiential learning. Actual physical changes occur in the brain, and the regions involved in the modes of learning. These are the regions involved in the modes of learning. So we need to understand that the brain is built for experiential learning. First of all, the sensory cortex receives information from the outside world through a concrete experience. And then the back integrative cortex creates meaning through reflective observations, while the frontal integrative cortex thinks through problems with abstract concepts, and the motor cortex of the brain helps take action. Number 4, the dialectic poles of learning or of the learning cycle are what motivates learning. So what motivates us to learn? We need both to make sense of the world. Concrete experiences, which are percepts of the here and now, and abstract concepts are gathered from either past or future thoughts. When action or reflection is overemphasized in the learning, then the learning is impossible. Hyperactivity or withdrawal complete into reflection are going to inhibit learning. So reflecting on the consequences of action can serve to connect or to correct errors and refine future actions. And acting on reflections prevents getting lost in thoughts. Number 5, learning styles are different ways of going around the learning cycle. So students learn in different ways, and the educators can best serve them when they understand the unique learning style. We should engage all models or all modes of learning styles in a holistic and engaging manner. So we can go from experiencing to reflecting with some imagining in between. So we can go from reflecting to thinking with analyzing between, and so on and so forth, as we can see in our cycle here. Number 6, full cycle learning increases learning flexibility and development. Educators are able to adapt a multi-model approach in the classroom to ensure all learning styles are being attended to. Some people tend to change their learning style depending on what they're learning or the situation they're in. And we spoke about that a little bit previously in the introduction. So teaching around the learning cycle with dynamic matching of teaching roles. And I think this is very interesting. The educators need to learn to match the learning focus with the subject matter at hand. So 4 common educator roles that we see are, first of all, the coach. A coach works one-on-one to apply and refine ongoing learning in context and uses feedback mechanisms and develops plans. Then there is a facilitator. Facilitator creates personal relationships and dialogue, and they draw out self-knowledge from the students and motivation from, that intrinsic motivation. The facilitator drags that out. Then we have a subject expert, which is more the authoritative style, which delivers knowledge by lectures and texts. This is more of the traditional type of teaching. And finally, we have the standard setter and evaluator, which is objective results oriented. You have the objectives and then the results, structures, performance, activities to evaluate learning. And finally, number 8 is the learning cycle can be a rubric for holistic, authentic assessment. Learners should demonstrate knowledge and skills in a real-life context, drawing education close to real life. The subject-centered question of what should my students know can only be addressed in conjunction with a learner-centered question, how can I help my students learn skills and knowledge and be able to transfer what they have learned in a real-life context? So I hope you can see how exciting this theory is and why I enjoyed reading about it and researching it. So hope you've learned something new today, just as I did all these 2 weeks. Thank you and have a good night.